This is Tracy Drummond, archivist for the Southern Labor Archives at Georgia State University. I am here today with Ms. Bernice Dixon, who is going to be interviewed for the Grady School of Nursing Oral History Project. Also joining us is Judy Clary, who's here to help me ask the right questions and all the good questions. We are at Ms. Dixon's house in Lilburn, and today is March 11th, 2015. Ms. Dixon, thank you so much for letting me come into your house and ask you lots and lots of questions for this project. Let's get started with where and when were you born?
I was born in Gwinnett County, Harbins District, March 6, 1922.
1922.
6 a.m. in the morning.
Really? And you just recently celebrated a birthday.
That's right.
Congratulations.
And the doctor came to the house to deliver me.
Oh, he did? Okay.
And my mother had nothing but aspirin to ease her pain.
Mm-hmm. And was your family a big family? Were you?
My grandfather had a lot of property, and he had 5 children, and he gave each of his children a farm. And my dad had a farm. I am the 4th child of 5. I was supposed to be the last. My sister came along 11 years later.
Oh, wow. Surprise.
But my dad owned the farm, and he decided to buy a few more acres to make it a bigger farm. And the Depression came along, and he lost everything.
Well, and what was it, farming just to sustain the family, or was it a working farm where he was selling the
My mother
products?
said he lost 27 bales of cotton in 1 year. And so the bank just foreclosed because he couldn't make the payments on this that he had added. And I was a baby. And they took everything Daddy had. They took the farm, they took the mules, they took the tools, everything that he farmed with. So growing up, we moved from one place to another. And to begin with, we had to farm on halves, which meant that half of everything Daddy made went to the owner of the house. Eventually, he was able to get 2 mules, and then it was third and fourth. You'd give a third or a fourth of everything you made to the owner of the house. I lived in 10 different places, all in Georgia, before I finished high school. I started grammar school in Lawrenceville, and walked to school. As a matter of fact, we were living there when they paved Highway 29 through Lawrenceville. I graduated from Grayson High School. I went to school in New Bern, Georgia. I went to school in Covington. I went to school in Rocky Branch. Rocky Branch was something else. My brother and I walked about a mile through the mud to a 2-room schoolhouse. And
How old were you at that time?
how old was I? I was in the, I guess I was probably 12 or 13.
Mm-hmm.
And I graduated from high school. We finally moved to a place next door to an Indian, Uncle Willis Leatherwood. He meant so much to me because he took time with this teenage girl. He taught me so many things. We grew our own syrup cane. He had a syrup mill, was interesting to go out there and watch him, the mule walking round and grinding the cane, and the juice running down, and the syrup, he made it just right. I had to work on the farm. I had to plow. I had to take care of the mules at the house, in the barn. I had to learn to milk a cow. I had to do all the things on the farm that most people didn't have to do. But we had to, because we raised everything that we ate and drank except coffee. And Daddy bought coffee on the credit at the store till the crop came in, and then he'd pay for it.
And so did all the kids have their own chores that they did every day?
My brother and I exchanged times about going to school when it was planting time. I stayed home one day and worked out in the field, and he would stay home the next day. All the children, my oldest sister was the one that liked to stay at the house and learn to cook and keep the house. My second sister was very healthy until she was 10 years old, and then she took rheumatoid arthritis, and she was an invalid from then on the rest of her life. She died in 1962. But my brother and I, we were the ones that worked on the farm and helped Mother and Daddy raise a crop. We moved to this house, as I said, by Uncle Willis, and they started a school bus going to Grayson. It came by the house, and that's how I managed to get to Grayson High School. Mm-hmm. And I spent my 10th and 11th grades. Back then, you only had 11 grades. And I spent my 10th and 11th grades at Grayson High School and graduated in 1939.
Okay. So it sounds like even though there was a lot to do at home, your parents still really valued education and wanted you and your brother to get an education. Would you say that's true?
Would you say that again?
That even though there was a lot of work to do at the farm, your parents really valued education and really wanted you to have an education?
They insisted that all of us finish high school. My mother and daddy did not. I think they finished about the 8th grade. And they taught us that the world did not owe us anything, that we needed to set the goals that we wanted to achieve, and then we need to work to achieve them. And that has stuck with me all my life. We went to church when we could. Of course, at the church they only had services like every other Sunday. And we would go, and if there was a revival meeting somewhere around, we'd have to go in the wagon, because we didn't have a car until, oh my goodness, I can't remember when. Mm-hmm. But we walked, or else sometimes we rode a mule. I rode a mule bareback. I did a lot of things out on the farm. When Daddy killed hogs, I'd crawl under the bed because I'd just break my heart to hear those hogs squealing. Isn't that awful? But I had to help with the cleaning everything. And then I don't need to go into that. But
actually, I mean, if you want to talk more about that, I think That's very interesting.
Actually, when I was about 4 years old, Mother had to get out in the field and work with Daddy, and she let me go to school. I took a Sears Roebuck catalog, sat there. The teacher said I was the best student she had. No, it was, we raised our own hogs. Got pigs, we raised them to hogs, and Daddy killed them every year. And he either hit it in the head with an axe or else he'd shoot it. And oh my, I can hear it now squealing, crying. I cried too. But we had to do that to eat. Mm-hmm. I helped Daddy and Mother hill potatoes. Now, folks probably don't know what hilling potatoes is now. But the sweet potatoes, we would collect them, and then we would place them, and then we would place straw over them, and and then another layer of potatoes, and then straw, and then dirt over them, hill them, make a hill out of it, and that we had potatoes then to eat, because it kept the potatoes. They didn't rot or anything. And with apples, we lived at a place once where they had an apple orchard, and we would collect the apples, and Mother had a quilt box that she kept her quilts in, and we would collect apples and lay them out in that quilt box between the quilts, and then we'd have apples to eat all year because it preserved them. We did a lot of things on the farm. Mm-hmm. We raised our own peanuts. And that what we did when it was raining, they would be under the wagon shelter. We'd pull them up and put them under the wagon shelter, and we'd sit out there and pick off peanuts. And then when the sun would come out, we'd put them out to dry. So we had peanuts to eat all year. So we just raised everything we ate.
You were taught to be very resourceful.
Absolutely. Mm. And then when my sister was born, we were having a really, really difficult time. And I would go down to the creek and pull creasy salad. Mother was not able to do all the work that she had to do, but she did.
Was she sick? Was your mother sick?
She nearly lost the baby because she developed pellagra then. We didn't know what it was at the time. And I claimed my sister as my child. I feel like I raised her. As a matter of fact, I helped her get through college before I ever got a college degree.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But she and I are the only two living now. My brother and I, we did everything together. I had a banjo and he had a guitar. We sang all the Western songs. I tell you, we were something else.
Do you remember any of your favorite songs?
Right now, I'm blanking on them. Okay. But and we would well, we just did a lot of things together. He was a wonderful, wonderful brother.
What was his name? What was his name?
John Alton.
John Alton. Mm-hmm. And your younger sister?
My oldest sister was Frances Alene. Mm-hmm. The next one was Mary Montine.
Montine?
Monteen, Montine.
Oh, I've never heard that name. That's beautiful.
And my brother was John Alton. My daddy's name was James Russell. and his daddy's name was James Alton. So, and mother's daddy's name was John Hall. So, my brother was named for both the grandfathers. And my sister is named Jimmy Opal. She was supposed to be a boy. I was supposed to be a boy too, but it didn't work out that way. And she came along 11 years, 3 months, and 11 days after I was. And I was an ignorant little girl at that time.
What do you mean by that?
On the facts of life.
Well, as you should be at 11, I think.
I was ignorant at 16, not even 11.
But anyway, it was interesting. We had dogs, we had cats, but they always stayed outside. And one time Mother gave me 3 baby chickens. I was going in the house one day and I accidentally closed the door and killed one of them. I stepped back and killed the other 2. So I never had another pet. I cried and I cried. Oh my. Folks aren't interested in all that.
No, it's great.
Yeah, it is. I imagine that your mother expected at some point those chickens would be dinner. Those little baby chicks would become
Probably
a dinner.
As a matter of fact, though, I never cooked a meal till after I got married. And I didn't get married till I was 30 years old.
Okay.
I really didn't.
Someone else was doing the cooking.
My sister did all that. And the first breakfast I cooked, I burned the toast. And my husband said, "Oh, I just love burned toast."
Oh.
But he cooked breakfast from then on.
Well, let me go back to your to Uncle Willis Leatherwood.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about?
Oh, yes.
About him? I think it must have been very interesting for you to have that sort of influence.
Oh, he was wonderful. He took us possum hunting.
Did you eat possum?
Oh yeah. Oh goodness. After we'd go out and the dogs would chase the possum. You look up in the tree and there's old possum up there with his eyes just shining. And you catch the possum and he'd take it home, and we called his wife Miss Alma. And she would cook possum and taters. Of course, we ate them. It was not my favorite food, but I ate it.
Right.
He spent time with me. I spent time with him, all that I could. And when we cut our syrup cane and took it out to his syrup mill, I was out there watching him. Oh my goodness! Every minute I could find, I tried to be somewhere close to him, because he was just wonderful. Of course, I had a wonderful daddy, too. We went out into the woods every Christmas and cut our Christmas tree. Mm-hmm. And came home and just decorated it. And in high school, when I was at Grayson, I was on the NYA, National Youth Administration. I think I made $5 a month, and I went in early and I built the fire in the stove in the classroom so we'd have heat, and I washed the board and dusted the erasers. I did all things, kept the classroom clean. And then that $5, I bought everybody a Christmas present and bought decorations for the Christmas tree for the first time. It was, oh my.
Do you remember the decorations? Were they just traditional balls or little dolls, or?
Well, what we had been doing is taking crepe paper and making little chains to go around the tree. And no, we didn't have, there were not balls or dolls or anything. Right now I can't remember what they were.
Okay.
But back then you didn't have Christmas decorations like we have today.
Right.
But we always had a live tree up until, I guess, we didn't have a tree. My daddy died on Christmas morning in 1946. And I guess no, 1945, excuse me. He died 4 months after I wrote State Board. He had cancer, and he was so sick we didn't have a Christmas tree that year.
That's understandable. So tell me a little more about your school experiences. What kinds of things, because I would imagine some of these schools were pretty small schools. You mentioned one only had 2 rooms in it.
Well, when we were at Newbern, Mother and Daddy moved back up to a house between Porterdale and Covington. And my sister, Daddy took her in a wagon to go to school until they moved, and they left us down there in an apartment, my sister and my brother and me. And my brother would go home every weekend and bring food back for us to have to eat. And the principal would come by and take my sister, pick her up and take her to school. And she graduated from high school. And she started a business course, but she finished it, but she was never able to work. And she was, in 1942, she was placed in the hospital, and they straightened her leg. They did it gradually by putting cast on. And she was never, well, she could walk a little bit with help. And after that, and she had every kind of treatment that they knew then. And I sat with her when I was about 4 years old. That's when she first got so sick. She couldn't even stand the covers. That Mother and Daddy would be out in the field, and I'd stay there to take care of her. The schools I attended.
Let's go back. That's a big responsibility for such a
know.
A young girl.
I know.
Yeah.
But she was the greatest inspiration I ever had.
Really?
And she never complained, and she was always there for me. And she's the smartest one in the family, and the prettiest. She was a beautiful girl. And she did a lot for my children, too, because they came along, and Mother had to take care of her, and she took care of my children so I could work. And I worked so I could take care of them and my family, too. So it was, I don't know what I would have done without her. And, but my sister was always there for me. She was extremely intelligent, and she knew me better than, I guess, anybody in this world. Mm-hmm. When I was learning to drive, she'd sit there in the car with me, and I did some crazy things learning to drive, but Seattle, Washington. But anyway, she was an inspiration. She really was. So my life was crazy.
Oh, it sounds like you had a great life.
It was great.
So back to the schools. What were the kind of subjects you were taking, and what did you enjoy learning in school?
I guess I enjoyed it all. I can't remember a course I took that I didn't really enjoy. And I was very popular to help folks. I was not a very popular young woman, but I except when they needed some help with their math or their chemistry or whatever we were taking.
Well, when you say popular, what do you mean exactly?
Well, most young girls go out on dates all the time, you know, and they got everybody. Of course, right now, I mean, after 50 years, I got all my class back together, all that were living, and they just thought I was the most wonderful person in the world. Maybe they thought more of me than I knew.
Do you think maybe you intimidated them?
I don't know.
You almost said it. You probably did.
I don't know. Never intended to. I really didn't have a lot of time either. I do remember one night when I decided I wanted to have a party. And Mother said, okay, go down and pick me 2 gallons of blackberries, and then you can go invite people. So I went down the pasture and literally picked her 2 gallons of blackberries. And then I got on my mule. We had 2 mules, Rhodey and Ida, and Ida was mine. She was a big black mule. Bareback. And I took Rhodey down and got a friend, and she went with me, and we went around and invited people to come. And they were already arriving when I got back home. And, of course, we did not have indoor plumbing. I never had indoor plumbing until 1942 when we moved to Atlanta. And we didn't... I was sitting in there by the... We did in the summertime. We'd set a tub of water out and get it warm and take a bath in that. And I was trying to wash the mule smell off of it before
the party.
when they all got there. Oh my! But that's enough about all.
Oh no, I like that story.
I someday you ought to read my history.
I look forward to it. So, you've already said that your parents valued education and wanted everybody to go to school. So as you were getting closer to graduation, were you encouraged?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And I was valedictorian of the class, and Kenneth Nix, he and I are the only 2 still living in our class. He was the salutatorian, and our subjects were out of school life, into life school. And I did into life school. Knew every word of it. I had one of the best instructors, Miss Robertson, and I knew it perfectly.
And what is that exactly?
What?
Your speech.
That's the speech I gave at graduation.
Oh, I see. Okay, I understand. Okay.
And I got up there, and we had a robe, you know. I looked out, and I saw people. Pulled my robe up, and I stood there, and I looked, and my sister, Montine, was sitting down there trying to prompt me. I couldn't even see her. I just stood there for I don't know how long, and then all of a sudden I started, didn't miss a word. My whole speech at the life school. I could have, I wanted to go through the floor. I felt so bad about doing that. But seeing all those people out there just all of a sudden just got to me.
You weren't prepared.
I knew the speech.
You were prepared for the speech, but not the
I had not spoken
audience.
in public like that before.
Right.
Just a little stage fright, huh?
It was something. So I got through high school. and I worked. And I got all my bills. And by the way, when I had my appendectomy, I came down with measles, and the doctor did too.
Really?
We couldn't figure who gave it to whom, you know.
Well, you said though that you, right out of high school, you had applied for
To Grady.
to the Grady School of Nursing. So what was the influence that made you want to be a nurse?
I always wanted to be a nurse, and I even helped everybody in school. If they had a scratch or something, they'd come to me and I'd help them with it. And this nurse, Alice, I think her name was Malden, she came to the school and gave us our immunizations. I looked at her, she had on this white uniform, this cap, and I said, I have to be a nurse. I have to be a nurse. And that's all I ever wanted. All I ever wanted.
Well, and how did you hear about Grady? Do you remember while you were still in high school, how you heard about?
Well, I'm not sure. Oh, she was a Grady graduate.
Okay.
Oh, she was a Grady graduate, excuse me. Yes, she was. And that's why that cap just, it just got to me, you know. She was the finest lady. Oh, my goodness. Just wonderful.
But of course the story goes that you applied and were accepted, but
I had to
you
work.
ran into some trouble.
And this is kind of a funny incident. when I had my tonsils out, I went up to Houston, and well, at that time we moved to Atlanta in 1942. The reason being, my brother and sister and I had bought a farm out here in the Tucker area. And
How old were you when you bought that farm?
I was working at a 10-cent. I was manager of a 10-cent store before I went into nursing.
Okay.
I was in my teens.
Okay.
And after we paid down on it, we discovered the man didn't have a clear title. So we had to leave that, and my brother and sister and I bought this house in Atlanta. It was in DeKalb County, but it was in Atlanta. And it's on what they call Oakdale Road now. It was Whiteford Avenue at that particular point, at that time. Excuse me, I've got to go.
Sure. Okay, so you're talking about your tonsillectomy.
Yes, they took me up to Houston, Georgia, and mother was in there with me, and they, when they cut my tonsil, I felt it, and it came out, and a gush of blood came out, and mother fell over on the floor. So they had to survive her.
Oh my goodness.
And after she got all right, well,
So they didn't give you any anesthesia?
no. They said they had deadened my throat, but I felt it. Anyway, they took me back home then, and we stopped at this place. They decided they wanted to get them something like a hamburger or something. I couldn't eat a thing, of course.
Yeah.
But I sure did have a sore throat after that. But my poor mother, they had to survive her. She just fell right over. It wasn't so funny then, but when I think back on it, it was right funny.
Well, isn't that interesting? They allowed her to be in the room. So were you just sitting up in like an exam chair when they did it?
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't even lie you down and put
I was
her
sitting
in
in
another
a chair.
room. Well, that changed by the 50s because I had mine out in the 50s and they put you to sleep in the 50s.
I had mine out in the 70s, and I remember the last thing they asked is something about like, well, tell me about that time you went to Disney World, or they were saying like, think about Mickey Mouse or something like that.
To think about.
And then out.
Well, they said that they had deadened my throat.
But it
they
didn't work.
supposedly put something in there, but it hurt. It didn't feel like anything. It hurt when they cut
I
it.
can't imagine.
Oh yeah,
Oh.
but I forgot about my pain when they had to work
When your
with my
mother
mother.
passed out.
Anyway,
But the thing we were just talking about, so you were accepted, but then you couldn't go right away because you got sick.
and I took 2 business courses.
Okay.
Got up to the final exam, and I said, "This is not for me." I worked and went to school at night to do that, and so finally, I resigned my job. I applied again. I resigned my job on Saturday. Went into nursing school on Monday.
So, but tell me about your job. I mean, because that was your first real work outside of
No,
the
my
farm.
first job, I worked as a waitress one day. I made a 50-cent. Honestly, that I got a tip of 50 cents that day, but I never could. I couldn't remember. I'd either forget the bread or I'd forget the drink. I'd forget something. Anyway, that was not for me. And so then I went to work at Sears, and I worked in the mail order department. Excuse me. I worked in the mail order department at Sears.
At the Sears Roebuck building in downtown Atlanta, or on Ponce de Leon?
On Ponce de Leon.
Okay.
And my sister and my brother and I rented an apartment down on St. Charles, right back of the old ballpark. And I worked there for a while, and then I got me a job at a 10-cent store. Mr. and Ms. Wise had 2 10-cent stores. One was right there at Boulevard, and there was a drugstore on the corner of Boulevard and Ponce de Leon. And Ms. Wise's, and then there was a little eating place, and then there was a 10-cent store. And I was manager of that 10-cent store. And it was, I really worked hard at that. But I enjoyed every minute of it. There was so much to do.
What kind of stuff did you sell in a 10-cent store?
Everything. And we had, when we started to take inventory, that was something else. We sold anything that you could get in an ordinary, I don't know what kind of store you'd call it now. They don't call them 10-cent store. Everything didn't cost 10 cents.
Right.
A lot of things did. But we sold, of course, we had all kinds of candy. We had all kinds of office kind of things that you needed in the office, to work with. And
So a store that would be today like a Walmart or a Target
Yeah.
or something like that. Okay.
it would be. And it was a lot of responsibility, but I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, I've enjoyed all the work that I've ever done. I really have. I might have complained about it at the time, but I really have enjoyed it looking back. Learned so much.
So I want to go back. So at this point, you and your sister and brother are living in Atlanta. But where's your mother, your other sister?
They had
And your babies?
They had rented a house in Tucker.
Okay, so they were still up in Tucker while
Oh, yeah.
the other 3 of you went into Atlanta. And
The farm we bought was almost at Jimmy Carter Boulevard. Go right back there was 9 acres. Went all the way back to the Sears railroad track back over there, the Sears outlet, and man just didn't have the clear title on it, so we lost. But I'm looking back, the Lord had a hand in it all. We needed to get into where we were.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to do that. We didn't know it at the time, but we did. Of course, we were so accustomed to being on the farm, never locking our doors or anything like that, and that's exactly what we did there in Atlanta, and it didn't exactly work. One night somebody came in front door, walked down the hall, came through Mother and Daddy's room, Mother's room, and came back through my sister's, my room. And I happened to be awake. Everybody else was asleep. And my sister was awake too. And then they walked back out the front door. Now I don't know what they took or whether they took anything or not, but it scared me half to death. And I said, "Daddy, we got to lock the door." And from then on, we kept our door locked. But we were just so accustomed out in the country, you know.
Right, right. Well, you said that you really liked working at the 10-cent store, but there must have been something that made you go back to nursing. There must have been a turning point.
Nursing is what was in my heart. I knew that's what I had to be. You know, a lot of people, and I really think, well, I know some people that's like this. They get into nursing for the money. Of course, there's no money to it back then. But I felt like I was called to be a nurse. I felt like that's what the Lord wanted me to be. And it was. And it was.
So you just realized that retail
I just realized
wasn't making you happy.
That I enjoyed the 10-cent store because I met a lot of people. I had a lot of responsibility, and the couple that ran the little eating spot next door, they were just wonderful. As a matter of fact, that mirror that's hanging in my wall in there, when I got married, they took it off of their wall and gave it to me. And I have 2 pictures they gave me. I used to keep them up all the time, but the children wanted to put up something else back there. But George Manus was his name. And they were just wonderful people. And they had right good hot dogs. And
That's good.
So in 1942, you finally enter the Grady School of Nursing.
September 1942. I entered Grady.
And tell me about your experiences as a new student at the School of Nursing, and what it felt like to be starting on this new adventure in your life.
Now remember that World War II, Pearl Harbor was bombed December the 7th, 1941. So I entered the School of Nursing September 1942. The war had, so many nurses were called into the war. And so as a student nurse, we staffed the hospital. When we first started, we wore our regular print dress, and we were in the preclinical, actually a probationary period, we called it then, for 6 months. And we had our basic sciences, our nursing arts, and all that during that period of time. And we would, we had 1 or 2 teachers, instructors, nursing instructors. And once we learned how to make a bed, how to give a bath, with the patient in the bed or out of the bed, how to fold linen, and all of that. We would go to the area. We had a little tray we carried, and it had the basic things for a bath on the tray. And we would go into the nursing area, and we would have a patient assigned to us. I remember the first patient I ever had, she had been shot, and she had a bullet lodged near her spine, and she was bedfast, and I had to give her a bath and make her bed, and she was in it. I did it. Oh, I was so proud of me. And the instructor came to check. She had been there, but she came back to check and see, and she took her hand and rubbed it underneath the bed. There was a little bit of dust there. Well, I had to go back. That's what we had to do. We had to dust the beds. Everything had to be clean in addition to the patient. And then after the probationary period, we got our uniforms and caps. Interesting thing was, though, about the first week I was in school, they needed 50 cents to buy some paper and stuff that I had to have, and I didn't have 50 cents. So I had to borrow it. But
well, did you save money and pay for your own first year of school?
Well, actually, we didn't have much to pay because we lived in the dormitory. We had to live in the dormitory. It was all females. And at this point in time, my dad had got a job with the federal government guarding a building downtown.
Okay.
And when I needed to go home, or when I had an opportunity to go home, he would come by and give me a token, and I could ride the streetcar home. And then he'd give me a token to come back. We didn't have any money. Daddy was working, but he wasn't making a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And so he brought me 50 cents, though, and I paid it back. But they furnished after the first 6 months. Well, let me tell you about that, though. At the end of the 6 months, probationary period, we met with Miss Feeback. And she looked at you, she looked at your record, and if she didn't think you'd make a good nurse, you didn't stay in the school. She was a stern, strict, and people would think she was really mean, but she was fair and she was honest, and turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me in nursing. And she expected you to do what ought to be done. She expected you to do the best you could. And if you didn't, well, if you were doing it and your best was not the highest, that was all right, so long as you were doing your best. Mm-hmm. And if she did not think you'd make a good nurse, you didn't stay. Okay? So I stayed, and at that point in time, most of the nurses had gone to the war. They were either in the Army or the Navy or something. So as student nurses, we staffed the hospital. And after this probationary period, we had 3 months days, 3 months evenings, and 3 months nights. We had 2 half days off a week. One was on Sunday, so we could go to the church of our choice. And we worked a minimum of 8 hours a day. And sometimes it was much longer than that. And we staffed the hospital. We had a nurse over the areas over the hospital at night that we could call on. And we just did what we had to do.
So even as you were taking classes, you were getting hands-on experience.
Our class time was over and above the work hours.
Okay.
And the doctors lectured to us, and then Miss Feebeck and this one instructor, I remember, Miss Baston, taught us nursing. But they were educating us to work in the hospital and nothing else. They stated that clearly in some of the annual reports. The theory was just satisfy some requirement, not necessary for us.
All practice.
And we practiced.
Mm-hmm. What surprised you most once you got in there and started learning? Were there any things that you didn't expect that surprised you?
I guess it was the discipline of it. And yet I lived a life of discipline, and the expectations, because there was just not a lot of room for any kind of error. And the awesome responsibility of patients' lives. We had such sick patients. And I remember one young boy who came in. He was so sick, and he eventually died. We couldn't save him. And his family, I mean, we were like a big family, the hospital was. And his mother and daddy and his brothers, well, I heard from one of them not too long ago, but we were just like a family. It was just like you were losing one of your own family. I had another young man, a boy, who climbed the telephone pole out on Boulevard. And for all practical purposes, he was electrocuted. I forgot how many volts of electricity went through his body, and he fell to the ground. And they brought him to Grady, and he was there for months and months and months and months. I don't remember exactly how long. But when he recovered, I was taking care of him. Of course, I was not the only one taking care of him. But he came back many years later. He was, I guess, in his 50s. And he came to the reception desk downstairs, and he asked the receptionist if Miss Kilcrease was still there. And she happened to know me because she had moved over from the old hospital too. And she told him yes, and she called me and asked me to come down to the receptionist desk. And I asked, could she have him just come on upstairs? I didn't know who he was. She said somebody wanted to see me. And this man came in. He sat down. I have a picture of him. It was in the paper and everything. He had lost an arm. Somehow or other, he'd been in the Army, and now he was a minister. And he said, I just want to thank you for saving my life. I said, I was not the only one. I said, I was not the only one that took it. He said, yes, you were there. You were there. I was there when he woke up, when he came out from under the... it was one... That's the beauty of being a nurse. It's the years later that you have patients who come back and say thank you. And it just does something to you. Don't you agree, Judy?
It makes it all worthwhile.
It does. It does.
You know, just one patient like that can make your whole career. And you go, okay, I'm doing the right thing.
I had some others too. I had a taxi driver one time that I was riding I got a taxi for some reason. I don't know why. It was very seldom I did that. but he asked me if I knew a Miss Kilcrease. And I said, well, I think I do. And he said, well, I just want to thank her for all that she did, you know, and he went on like that. So those are the things that make nursing worthwhile.
I believe so. Let me ask you this. I'm curious, as someone who doesn't know a lot about nursing. I've only ever been a patient. Are there courses where they teach you how to handle sensitive situations where maybe you have to, I'm a grown woman. Why can't I even ask you the question? But like the first time you have to give someone an enema or do something, I mean, y'all probably just think it's
Bodily functions.
Bodily functions is okay, yeah. So I mean, are there special tips on? Because I feel like it's always, even if it's kind of embarrassing, it's always very respectful, and so. But is there any? I mean, I'm really not asking to be silly, but I just feel like that, especially maybe if you've had a more reserved upbringing, and then you're put into this job where you have to get very close to people.
Especially as a young, naive lady.
And when I was a student nurse, the orderlies took care of the private kind of things for men.
Okay.
But what you do, we always had to keep patients thoroughly draped. And you had to make the patient as comfortable as possible. Even regardless of how uncomfortable you might be, you had to be sure that the patient was comfortable. I was in, this is terrible. This lady had a spontaneous abortion, and they had her in, I was on the GYN floor, and they had her in the treatment room. They were having to complete it because she was bleeding so. And I was in there, and it was warm and all of that, and it really got to me. And the doctor turned around and looked at me. And he said, Miss Kilcrease, he said, I think you need to go out. What he said, you need to go out and have an herb. And I said, yes, sir. And I went out. But then I got myself under control, and I went back in and finished. There was another nurse in there helping too. But there were so many things. You made the patient feel as comfortable as possible, regardless of how uncomfortable you were. And that's something that the patient was the focus of everything. And making that, you had to think of that patient, what if I was in that position? How would I feel? What would I need? What could they do to make me feel better? And that's the only way I got through, because we had awesome responsibility during World War II. The students did. And it's something else. We had to check every piece of equipment. We had to check narcotics. We had to check everything at the end of each tour of duty. And that was something too. You had to chart on every patient's chart. On day duty in the mornings, when you started to go on duty, you had an inspection. And you had to walk by Miss Feebeck or Miss Logan. You had to have a watch with a second hand. You had to have a black pen and a blue pen and a red pen. You had to have your scissors, and you kept your scissors stuck back here in the waist of your apron. And no makeup, no perfume. Your shoes had to be spotless, your uniform spotless, and if there was anything out of order, you went back to your room and you got it straight before you could go on duty. And we made rounds with the doctors in the mornings. We carried out all of his orders. We had to chart on the chart every tour of duty. We had to keep the temperature graph up to date. I don't know how we did it all. I really don't.
Tell her why you had to have 3 different color ink pens.
Because you charted in blue during the day, and at night you charted in red. And on the temperature graph, I've forgotten which one it is you charted in red. Was it the temperature was in red and the pulse and respiration was in blue?
Things were color coded.
Okay.
And so you had to have that. And that just, I still have my scissors.
Well, you mentioned orderlies a minute ago and said that they would help with some bodily functions for the male patients. But it seems like they would have had mostly very different training from the nurses.
Well, they did. But we had some excellent orderlies. There's one named Squire Benning. I just love that little old man. He helped me so much. He even helped me. He helped me as a student, and he helped me as a graduate nurse. He was there. He knew how to do. He knew what to do. And it was just like Squire. I need you, Squire. And Squire was right there. He was just wonderful. Wonderful. We had some good orderlies, but what they did when a patient was going to surgery, we had to shave and prep them. And what the orderly did, he shaved and prepped the male patients. He gave the male patients enemas. He took the urinal to them. You see, we had a room where everything was, the patients did not have personal items. The only thing that was left at the bedside of the patient was a water pitcher and an emesis basin. But the bedpans you carried to the patient, you took it back into the hopper room, and you ran it through the so-called sterilizer, and then you hung it up on the wall so that bedpans were used for different, whoever needed them. Mm-hmm. The wash basin's the same way. And so you had to keep them very clean. The thermometers were kept in alcohol, and you used the same thermometer going from patient to patient. You know, not from patient to patient. They were sterilized in between. Mm-hmm. And the sphygmomanometer, your blood pressure apparatus, carried it right along, used it on each patient. But, and we had to keep the areas clean, and the ward had there were 27 beds on the ward, and there was a porch area. Actually, the hospital, the original hospital was built in 1892, and in 1912 they opened up what we called, it was the Butler Street Hospital, and that's where I did my nursing, my student nursing. And they built it so that there was a porch area, so that actually all patients at some time could be out in the sunshine. But then we had to close we still had windows all the way around, but we had to close it in for patient uses. And we had about 6 or 7 beds out there. And and then we had 1 room, 2 rooms with 2 beds in them. So you had a lot of patients. And when the wine cough fire came along in 1956, I was in charge of the male surgical floor then. I had graduated. And 1946, excuse me, not 56. And they called me out of bed, went over there and discharged all the patients except the immediate post-operative patients, put them out on the porch area, and we admitted 27 patients. Didn't have time to really make up the charts completely, but I had a chart on every bed with basic things like a nurse's note and doctor's order sheet. And I made rounds with the doctors, gave whatever medication needed to be given. And one of our greatest problems was the visitors, because everybody, when they heard about the fire, came and looking for their relatives. And it was something else. But the patients in the Wine-Cough fire were so seriously ill that they died, or they weren't too sick. Smoke inhalation and things like that. And there's so many dead bodies that the morgue was overrun, and they let them out down in the clinic. And I remember going down there, and I can still see that little child, about 2 or 3 years old, all wrapped up in he had on his, because it was cold weather, it's December the 7th, and his mother had thrown him out the window trying to save him. And he didn't have any injury except right here where his head had hit. I just walked away crying. I still can cry when I think about him. But there were so many dead patients. 114, I think, died. And Grady Hospital was there. We got most of the patients.
It was the largest hotel fire to date in the world.
And I think, in going back and reading about it, because I've included it in the history, there was a group of young people here, and they were in the upper floors, and it started on the 3rd floor, and the owners were, I think, on the 5th floor, and they died in the fire. And if I recall correctly, all those young people died too. They couldn't get out.
People were jumping out of windows and everything.
It was awful. It was awful. Just terrible. But
were there not sort of safety, like exits in place for them to?
All they had was a stairwell to get out.
Just the one that was inside.
And it started in the stairwell. The fire did. I don't think they ever really found out exactly how it started.
National laws, fire safety laws, changed because of the Wine-Cough fire. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. It was a worldwide news event.
In the 1940s, a lot of things happened.
Well, and before we talk more about that, I wanted to ask you, so at Grady, were you accepting both white and black patients at the time?
We had a black hospital and we had a white hospital.
So Grady actually had 2 separate...
We also had 2 nursing schools, but they had the same curriculum. I taught both groups.
But they were different schools.
Well, the white school was chartered in 1898. The black school was chartered in 1917. So it was 2 schools, a black and a white, but it was one school, if you can understand what I'm saying.
It had the same administration, but students were taught in different places.
Miss Feebeck, after Miss Ludi Andrews started the black school.
Okay.
And she left in 1922.
But
And Miss Feebeck was the director of nursing of all of the nursing schools.
But were African American students taught at a different school prior to? Were they taught at a different school prior to the 40s?
No.
No, it was
all at Grady from 1917 on.
Okay.
They actually started 1914, but they weren't chartered till 1917, and the first class graduated 1920.
Okay.
But before they had the black school, the white students took care of black and white. Grady always accepted charity patients, black and white. And then when they had the two schools, they had two hospitals. They had the black hospital, the white hospital. So the black students took care of the black patients, and the white students took care of the white patients, correct? So you never took care of a black patient as a student nurse.
Never took care of a what?
Is that correct? You never took care of a black patient as a student
in the
nurse?
operating room.
Yeah, the operating room was shared. That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was essentially like, I guess, I'm just trying to understand exactly how it was set up. The same building, but sort of separated.
No.
But they were
two
separate buildings.
And the black students were living in the building on Butler Street, which is now something else. And the white students' nurses' residence was built in 1922, Hirsch Hall. They lived in that building. Now, in 1958, the new hospital was built.
Okay.
And it was built on an H kind of shape, and the A and B areas faced Butler Street, and that was for the white people. There was an E corridor, and on this side, they had white patients up to the middle of the building. And then from the middle of the building over to the other side, the CD areas faced Pratt Street. That was for the black schools, black patients. And when the school integrated in 1964, all the patients were integrated, regardless. The blacks were moved to the white side and whites to the black side, according to whatever was wrong with them, the surgical patient, the medical patient, so forth.
Patients were integrated, but students were also integrated at that time.
In 1964, students were integrated too.
Okay.
And what I did, when the students came in, I assigned them roommates. I assigned them alphabetically because I didn't know whether they were black or white. And then after 6 months, I gave them the opportunity of changing roommates if they wanted to. So.
Okay. Well, how did that go when everything was integrated?
No problem.
And,
I can't recall a single problem the hospital had at that time.
Not even with patients who had issues with having.
I was there.
You were there.
I was there, and I don't remember any real problems we had.
Okay.
Because it was because of the people. You see, we accepted each other. I taught black students from the first day I taught at Grady Hospital, and it just broke my heart that. And we did sometimes integrate the class, and some people from the city of Atlanta came down touring the classrooms one time, and they made us separate them back out. But the people that worked at Grady, they were interested in taking care of patients. They weren't looking at color.
But from the patient perspective, there were never any white patients that made a fuss that didn't want to be
Not
taken.
that I know of.
Okay. And I'm sorry that if I'm doting on this, but sort of given other attempts to do that, there was so much to integrate in any situation, whether it be schools or anywhere else. There's always been such at the time, a backlash against such things.
Well, You have to think about it. People are sick. Mm-hmm. They don't care who takes care of them as long as they're taking good care of them. And actually, nurses and doctors don't go into it, even back then, to take care of one race.
Right.
Right.
If the patient's sick, you take care of the patient.
Right.
Okay.
Black, white, yellow, green, or whatever.
Okay.
That's the way I always felt. And in teaching, they needed to know, and I held them to the same kind of standards that I held the white students to. What I did in teaching pharmacology, I had to check each student off on the administration of medications 3 times. And they had to make 95 in my class to pass. Well, never had but one real situation. This student, she could not, any time that I was trying to check her off, she absolutely just messed everything up. And one day, one of my black friends says, Miss Dixon said, would you mind letting me check her off on medication? Said, I think she's scared of you. I said, okay, because she had passed the theory part of it. And she checked her off and she just did fine. So I said, well, that's good. I was really sorry she was so afraid of me.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that, because I went to see one of your black students on Saturday, Barbara Nelson Wise, just delightful person. And she was when the school was segregated, and Miss Dixon taught her pharmacology. And she told me, she said, a lot of people were afraid of Miss Dixon, but I wasn't afraid of her. And she helped me because she taught me a little song to remember the drugs. And she sang the song for me on Saturday.
Do you know what song she's talking about?
And she said, and I didn't learn the song. You didn't teach me pharmacology, so I didn't learn the song. And I looked at her and I said, you remember that to this day? She says, I couldn't have gotten out of pharmacology if it hadn't been for Miss Dixon, and that song is stuck to me to this day. She was singing digitalis, potassium, and she was just singing different drugs. I said, Barbara, that's the cutest story. And she said, Miss Dixon taught me to sing the drugs, and that helped me. Isn't that incredible?
I want to get this in an interview. I want to hear the song.
No, I don't remember, because
she didn't remember much of it, but she did remember enough that I went,
Well, I did everything I could to help them learn,
Mm-hmm.
And if they didn't learn it, and I didn't think they didn't pass. Mm-hmm. But I don't know of a single person that ever complained when they didn't pass that I had done anything wrong. Mm-hmm. But
okay, so things like that are just always, looking back. I'm just curious as to how big transitions like that happened. I want to go back to when you were still in school. We've still got so much to talk about. We've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes, and there's still so much to talk about. Although I do see that my battery is getting low, so we might need to wrap this up in 10 minutes, because I don't want the recorder to go out on us, because I want it all captured. But I did want to ask, so as you were going through, you've talked about the big responsibility of being a student at the time because of World War II, but you were still taking your regular coursework above your 8 or more hours a day. So what classes did you enjoy the most? Do you remember?
All of them.
Really? Everything?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because I was learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I was learning something new that I had never been exposed to before. Mm-hmm. And the awesome responsibility, it just weighed so heavy on my shoulders. I can't think of a single course I did not enjoy, okay? At the moment in time, enjoy is not the best word to use to express it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I appreciated it. I got into it. I wanted to learn. But living in the dormitory now, Miss Moncrief said at 10:30 every night the lights had to go out. But we had 4 bathtubs, and many of us, many nights, sat in that bathtub. She didn't check the bathrooms at night. We'd sit in the bathtub and study. And when it came time for me to be studying for state board, as a senior, I'd wake up many mornings with the book lying right on top of me. That's true. Because I'd be so tired and I'd lie down on my bed, I'm going to study now. Wake up in the morning, it's lying right there. So I must have absorbed some of it.
So, were you still able to see your family regularly while you were in school?
Was I what?
Were you able to see your family regularly while you were in school?
When I had a streetcar token, sometimes I just caught a ride. And you could then, and it was safe. I remember standing at the streetcar stop, and this soldier came by in a car. Asked me if I wanted to ride, and I said yes. So he took me right to my house. Of course, along the way, he offered me a drink and all of this. And when we got to the house, he said, "I never have met anybody like you before." He said, "You didn't drink? You don't smoke?" I said, "No." He said, "Here, I want to give you some candy." He gave me a box of candy.
He wanted you to have some enjoyment in life.
Right.
But seriously, it was safe. We could walk anywhere, go anywhere, and and in the hospital now, I have to say that the administrator, Mr. Frank Wilson, and later on Mr. Pinkston, we were like one big family. Mr. Wilson knew us by name, and we'd walk by the door, and he knew what kind of situation we might have at home, because if, for example, somebody who was employed had real difficulties at home financially and this sort of thing, he worked it out some way to help them. I mean, he was just a wonderful person. And when my father died, folks were right there with me. When my sister died, they were there at the funeral. I mean, it was that kind of feeling you had. We just cared about each other. We were like one great big family then. Grady Hospital was. Some of the most wonderful people I ever met, and I learned from every one of them. I learned something from every one of them.
Well, before we move on to the next chapter, is there anything else you want to say about your time as a student?
It's an experience I'll never forget. I'm amazed at this point in time that I still have a mind.
And what a mind it is, if I may say so.
Yeah, I can't believe you remember names and dates so accurately.
Well, I don't remember all names, but there are some that just really stick with me. Right. I remember Miss Araminta Downing. She was a model in New York before she came down here. And she spent her life taking care of various family members, and then she was here all alone, and she got sick, and she didn't I took her out to my to Mother's one time to eat supper with us. She was so excited about a flowering shrub along the way as I was driving. Just, oh, so excited. She was a wonderful, wonderful lady, but she had nobody. And Grady took care of her till she died, because she got very, very sick. And I can see her now. She was the model all the way through. Every time and so many wonderful people that I've met at Grady. Just so many.
But in 1945, you also mentioned that's the year your father passed away.
Beg pardon?
In 1945, you mentioned that's the year your
December
father...
25th.
So you had already graduated.
Well, the day I wrote State Board, everybody was going out to celebrate that night, and Mother called and asked me to come home. And I said, I just don't know how I can come tonight. And I walked all the way down to where Georgia State is now in Hurt Park, and something just told me, you catch a streetcar and go home. Mm-hmm. And I did. The rest of them went on, and they told me that Daddy had been diagnosed with cancer. And he had the cancer of the pancreas and cancer of the lungs, and there was not anything they could really do to help him. So 4 months later, he died. And my daddy he was the man that really, most gentle, most wonderful father anybody could possibly have, particularly a little girl who was Tubby. That was my name, because I was broader than I was tall till I was 13, and then I just shot straight up. But I can see him now. He was there for me when I felt like every year we got Mother bought material to make us all a dress, one a year, and she let my sisters pick out what they wanted, and I got what was left over. And then she left it. She made mine just hanging on me like a bag, and I'd cry. And I can remember Daddy holding me on his lap and talking to me. Don't worry, baby, everything's going to be all right. I said, but she doesn't love me.
Aww.
But she did.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, he was a wonderful man. It was very heartbreaking, because I would go out there at night when I worked all day, and there were many nights he didn't want me to leave the room. But things like that happen in life.
They do.
But my time at Grady as a student nurse taught me so much. Not only did it teach me nursing, but it taught me that there are all kinds of people that you come in contact with, and you can learn from them, or you can close your mind and not. And everybody's interesting. They've always got something that will benefit you in some way. And there were so many wonderful people at Grady. I mean, from the orderly, from the maid, all the way up to the superintendent. They really were. And we had so many patients, such sick patients. But they were not just a patient, they were a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what made the difference. That's what made the difference. And you make friendships. But I went 50 years without, and then I decided I wanted to get my class together if I could. And I tried. Finally got all those who were living, and since then, we would meet once a year, had the best time, but they've not been able to come in the last 2 or 3 years, and don't have, but in my class, I know of about 4 or 5 who are still living. But none of them as old as I am.
I forget that you're as old as you are. You have such a youthfulness about you. I have to keep reminding myself that you're 93.
I am.
Yeah, I know, but it's hard to believe.
She doesn't look it at all, does she? Look at that head of hair.
Some days I feel it.
Well,